With Seaworld Orlando getting a new coaster in 2024, it brought a couple of questions in my mind about the Seaworld chain. Namely, have their recent ride additions been good ones, and where's the company heading, and is it a good direction? As a whole, Seaworld Entertainment is a very interesting company to look at. They've completely changed from originally doing mostly animal shows to now focusing almost exclusively on rides. Of course, when you focus exclusively on rides, you want to make sure that the rides you add are good ones, and I think Seaworld has added some very good coasters, but sometimes the additions puzzle me a little bit, and we're going to look at that and more in this video, but let's start with Seaworld Orlando's new coaster. This is going to be a family launch coaster, and it's going to be built by B&M. Now, if you're thinking, wait, we've never seen this before, then yeah, you'd be correct. This will be a prototype. I do find this interesting because a few years ago they added Icebreaker to Seaworld Orlando, which was supposed to have a 48-inch height requirement, but instead has a 54-inch height requirement. 6 inches is a big difference, and they had to bump it up after the ride opened, so I wonder if this new coaster is being built with the intention of doing what Icebreaker couldn't. In the family coaster market, there are a bunch of companies that can do good family coasters. One that comes to mind is Vekoma. Big Bear Mountain at Dollywood looks like one of the world's best family coasters, and that opened earlier this year. I think it also has a 39-inch height requirement, which is just ridiculous for a ride that good. I don't know what the height requirement for this new coaster at Seaworld is going to be, but I imagine a little higher than 39 inches. So talking about B&M, I do wonder if they gave Seaworld a discount because they bought 2 prototypes, this one and then Pipeline the Surf coaster the year before. This would make a lot of sense, and this park is starting to become the B&M capital of the world. They already had 3 good ones, but then they added Pipeline and this new coaster, making 5 B&Ms in total out of their 8 roller coasters, 8 meaning once this new family coaster opens. In recent years, while there have been some innovations, people usually view B&M as the safe, reliable company. They can give you some form of looping coaster or some form of airtime machine, whether that's a Giga or a Hyper. These coasters are capacity machines and typically are very reliable. But they don't step out the box nearly as much as a company like Incl does. That being said, with these new additions to Seaworld, they're starting to change that narrative a little bit, so that's kind of cool to see. But let's get back to Seaworld, because that's ultimately what this video is about, not B&M. So I put together a rating system for the coasters Seaworld has added since 2020. Each coaster Seaworld has added since then will receive up to 10 points. 5 of those points are given for the ride itself, and 5 of those points are given for how well they fit into the park's lineup. This coaster craze for Seaworld originally started ahead of the 2020 season, and while for obvious reasons, a lot of those coasters didn't open in 2020, in fact only Texas Stingray did, this was the first time we really saw that Seaworld was going to go all out with their roller coasters. Using that rating system I mentioned a moment ago, the coasters that were going to open in 2020 received an average rating score of 8.8, which is actually pretty high. I gave Iron Gwazi a 10 out of 10, and no coaster scored lower than 8 out of 10. Seaworld did a great job with these additions. I think they really did. There were a lot of great roller coasters, and they filled in gaps in their respective parks. For example, the aforementioned Icebreaker at Seaworld Orlando was that park's first launch coaster, and that's something that they desperately needed. Another good example would be Seaworld San Antonio with Texas Stingray. Texas Stingray was Seaworld San Antonio's first and currently only wooden coaster. So good on Seaworld for filling that major gap in San Antonio's ride lineup, and Texas Stingray is one of the best coasters there. Since that batch of coasters, Seaworld has added 3 more, and 1 more, the one in Orlando, is underway. Using the same rating system, the ratings on average dropped from an 8.8 all the way down to a 7.5. So what was the reason for this decline? A major reason is redundancy. Look at Seaworld San Diego. They added Arctic Rescue, which is a family launch coaster. If you didn't know that this ride had a jet ski seating setup, then you probably would be wondering why they added this coaster, because it's so similar to Manta in the same park. Both of these feature at least 2 launches and have similar elements, twists and turns, and small hills. The seating orientation on Arctic Rescue at least sets these apart, but other than that, these are very similar. Then, if you look at Busch Gardens Williamsburg, we saw something similar play out. This was of course with another Intamin straddle coaster, Dart Coaster. So let's look at Busch Gardens Williams' ride lineup and why this ride doesn't really make sense. Firstly, if you're looking for a launch coaster, Busch Gardens Williamsburg to this point already had 3 other launch coasters. One coaster that stands out from this group when talking about Dart Coaster would be Verbolten, which already has a major indoor section that takes up about 80% of the ride. Now, you may be thinking, wait a minute, it's impressive that Dark Coaster even fits in this building to begin with. They couldn't have really done any other type of roller coaster here. That's true, but that brings me to my next quarrel with the Seaworld chain, and that would be theming or lack thereof. Seaworld has added a bunch of coasters since 2020, as we've been talking about, but the theming for these has been underwhelming at best. There are some coasters that they could have done some really neat theming with, like Arctic Rescue or Pantheon, but there just wasn't a whole lot there. Even Dark Coaster is pretty light in that department. A few of their parks, mainly Busch Gardens Tampa and Busch Gardens Williamsburg, have really good theming, but the Seaworld chain has been stepping away from theming their attractions in recent years. They need to add a dark ride to most, if not all of their parks, and I think another thing that they've been straying away from is adding flat rides. Some of the parks in the Seaworld chain are really deprived of flat rides. Others, like Busch Gardens Williamsburg, have a decent amount, but when you look at the ones on the lower end, SeaWorld San Antonio has just 3, and SeaWorld Orlando has just 5. That is a shockingly low number for parks of this scale. SeaWorld San Antonio in particular stands out. They have a 2-to-1 coaster to flat ride ratio, which is just crazy. I don't know if I've ever seen another park have that type of ratio. I would love to see 1 or 2 of these parks, maybe San Antonio and Orlando, just because those parks are on the lower end, get a flat ride package, maybe 3 to 5 flats. You can spread out these additions over the course of a couple years, market each of them as a brand new ride, and not only does this add a new ride to your park, but it also takes some crowds away from the major roller coasters. Now, I definitely wouldn't take a flat ride over a roller coaster in most cases, but they just take people away from the major rides and make your overall experience at the park a little bit better, and they vary the park's ride offerings. And sometimes it can become one of the most popular rides in your park. In recent visits to Six Flags Discovery Kingdom, we've seen Wonder Woman the Pendulum be one of the most popular rides there. All that being said, I think SeaWorld might be leaning too hard on the roller coasters, which I know sounds crazy, but I feel like they need to diversify their offerings. Roller coasters are fantastic, but you can't just do roller coasters. That's not going to work out long term. Sometimes you only need 1 or 2, and yet you still have a really good park. To give an example of this, one of my personal favorite parks is Disney's Animal Kingdom at the Walt Disney World Resort. Expedition Everest is the lone coaster there, and it's fantastic, but the park is so much more than that. The atmosphere is incredible, and you really feel transported to a different world. But from a ride perspective, while there aren't many, they have some really good ones. They have the safaris, which is unique. In addition to that, both of the rides in Pandora, the World of Avatar, are great. So Animal Kingdom doesn't need tons of rides to be a really good park. Now, could they use more rides? Sure, but they don't necessarily need it. This is just to prove a point, and I think SeaWorld is becoming pretty one-dimensional with their roller coasters, which I think could be becoming a problem. But I do wonder if SeaWorld is becoming the new Six Flags. Let me explain this. At the turn of the century, Six Flags was going super ambitious, adding coasters, adding parks left and right, and eventually it led to bankruptcy. Now, SeaWorld hasn't been nearly that ambitious in recent years, but there are certainly some parallels you can draw. I wonder how long this strategy for SeaWorld is sustainable, because eventually they can kind of get worn out with just new roller coasters, and I know that SeaWorld San Antonio is getting a new water ride and things like that, but still, it's mostly coasters that SeaWorld has been adding recently. All of this to say, they're a very interesting chain to keep tabs on. They always seem to surprise us with their additions, so it'll be interesting to see in the future what they pull out of the hat next.